yeah, let's get started. Super excited to be here with Patrick Cozzi for this Fireside Chat. And yeah, Patrick and I learned to know each other about maybe 10 years ago. We've just seen in Neil's presentation that the history of glTF is already like around a decade old, maybe a little older even. And now, like 10 years later, we're just getting together to discuss about the same topics, but with a slightly different angle. And that's super exciting. So my first question to Patrick was, how do you feel after a decade of like working on glTF and really going out there and like heading also the glTF development at Khronos for quite a while? How has that baby evolved, like growing up the past decade?
I love that question, Max. And I mean, it's been quite an honor, and I think very, very exciting and satisfying. But first, I just wanted to thank you and BGG and Khronos for bringing us together today. And, you know, it's a Saturday, right? And we have a lot of folks here. And in every talk that I've seen, I heard the word passion, right? So that I think that's fantastic. And that kind of shows, you know, why we're here and what we're about. But, you know, the earliest days of glTF, as Neil alluded to, really came from WebGL. We wanted an efficient 3D runtime format to open for the web. And it was very much a grassroots effort, right? And we were going door to door at cigarettes to, you know, one company to the next company. Hey, we're doing this thing. What do you think? We were trying to get together little bits of funding to do, the loaders and 3JS and so on. But as that momentum started, catching on, it was just unbelievable to watch it take on a life of its own and watch it become a place that the community wants to contribute and wants to advance. So yeah, happy to go on a lot more as you know.
Oh yeah. Thank you so much. And like just adding to that, like bit of reminiscence here. So I think when we started working together, there was like a lot going on around WebGL, right? As you said, and like people were looking for a common format for the WebGL engines, right? And then glTF, like the name means GL transmission format, right? So that is what it was designed for originally. And we'll get in a bit to that topic again, like how much of that is still true, yeah? So the GL transmission format, it, as you said, like came up as like a grassroots movement. It's really cool, like to see that, like in Khronos. And then people ask like these important questions, like, for example, how are we going to define materials? All right, we have heard today, like materials, that's a pretty complex topic. And you got to start somewhere. And glTF 1.0 was like still around back then. And then a bit later, we got 2.0, and that's around for like a decade now. So that's would also be a question. What is glTF 3? Will that come? What will it look like? But the transition from 1.0 to 2.0, there was this topic of materials. And 1.0, you had shaders, and people had to define their own shader. And at some point, people got together and thought, hey, it would be great if we would have a PBR material, right? And as we have seen today, material extensions is still like one of the biggest topics being worked on in the glTF world. So that was one thing that we did together. And the other thing was the binary format, which is now like known under the extension GLB. So both of that didn't exist. And like that is what the baby had to learn, like the first steps, right?
Yes.
So in 2014, we published a little paper around that. And then I saw, wow, there is already a binary extension that is being proposed by the Cesium team. And that sounded felt for me. And then we got together at SIGGRAPH and talked about it, made it a common proposal. So how did you get there from the Cesium side of things?
A lot of good stuff there. I do want to spend a moment on the name though. So I was not involved with glTF from day one. It was probably like 9 months in at that point, and I saw a talk from Brandon Jones and Fabrice that was called WebGL. Yeah, at the time, that was JSON plus binary, and I go, geez, I'm working on this on my own separately for Cesium to do aircraft and ground vehicles and satellites. So I go, I need to stop what I'm doing. I need to start using this, right, to then get the benefit of the ecosystem. So the name did transition from WebGL TF to just glTF, although we almost called it ATF, or asset transfer format, which may have made more sense in retrospect. I also want to talk, before on the binary glTF, I want to talk about the materials for a moment, because that was a huge inflection point where glTF 1.0 was just GLSL shaders. And we felt that that was true to the mission and the design principles of glTF, because it's ready to render. You know, you get the glTF content, you can hand that shader right on to WebGL, and off you go. You don't have to do a lot of processing. And I was actually I was a diehard in this camp, right? But, you know, it turned out that the world was moving beyond that. The world wanted more complicated and more real world materials. And, you know, we worked on GLTF at the time. We're like, well, geez, if we put PBR into GLTF, it would also help bring PBR onto the web. And keep in mind, this is 2014, so this is quite a while ago. And then last night, Gary wouldn't take any credit, although I do want to make sure that we tell the story. But it was really, you know, Microsoft came knocking, Gary, Sharad, John Pioli, and they said, hey, we like GLTF and we consider using it very broadly. Would you consider replacing GLSL with a PBR? And I remember, like, when they asked for this phone call, I was on vacation. I was at the beach. I'm like, oh, this is going to be an important phone call. So I'm taking this call. And Neil's on the call, and Tony Parisi. And, you know, when Gary and Chris said that, we're like, well, of course we want to do this. So I think that was very cool. But then we did that work on PBR for GLTF 2.0. Back to your question on the binary GLTF. So somewhat coincidence. So the shirt that I'm wearing here today is a Cesium shirt. You may notice the colored figure right here. That's the Cesium Man GLTF sample model. I think it was one of the first sample models for skinning. So that is on the image here. The other part of the shirt is showing downtown Philadelphia. And the Cesium Man has his arms up like Rocky, you know, on the top of the art museum and looking out towards the city. Cesium Man is GLTF model. The rest of the city here is in 3D tiles, which is essentially many GLTF models in a spatial hierarchy that allows you to stream really large models like terrain or 3D cities. So I was actually working on 3D tiles and GLTF in parallel, and, you know, at the same time. And I wanted 3D tiles to really just be spatial subdivision and geospatial reference rate for GLTF. Then I noticed that, you know, GLTF with the JSON then referring out to all these different textures and one or more binary files. I'm like, wow, like I'm requesting hundreds or thousands of GLTFs as the user flies through that scene and is incrementally loading. You know, wouldn't it be great if it were just one request, right? So that was kind of the motivation for binary GLTF. And then at the time, and again, like 10 years ago, there was a JavaScript API that came out that made it very easy to be able to pull the JSON out of the binary buffer to make it possible. As for the name, and if you go back and look at the first blog on this, I originally had the file extension as BGLTF, so 5 letters. And my colleague Scott Hunter goes, try this on for size. GLB. So you put the B knows binary GLTF, put the B last. So Scott came up with the extension last.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, super exciting. And again, like it feels magical, like to look back and see what happened. Like again, like shout out to Microsoft, for example. Like it felt really cool when we worked on like the PBR standard, right? And then all of a sudden that file format and like that standard was supported in Microsoft PowerPoint, and you could drag and drop a 3D file in PowerPoint and then start with it. It's like, okay, that's not going to disappear anytime soon. It's going to last. So that was really amazing. And then with all the adoption, like the natural thing that happens is like people don't know, what can I do with this, right? And like we saw that we positioned it from Khronos as like the JPEG for 3D. That was the slogan, and is still the slogan. It's debatable whether it should be a WebP of 3D now or whatever, but the mission of the JPEG is very clear, right? It's the amazing thing about it. It's like a picture, like a single rate thing, usually that you pick on the web, and it renders fast inside a website, and it's small, but it's not a Photoshop file. It's nothing you want to pass around for editing. It's like the last mile format. And there are different tendencies, of course, that people say, but I love this thing. I want to be able to edit it. And that's a good question, a fair ask. So then there's this aspect of being an exchange format. And then finally, people say, I have different applications and I have this interactive behavior here. Like, can I just maybe click on this thing and then the car has the lights and the lights turn on or something like this? Simple interactions, or maybe more complex ones. So there's interactivity, there's exchange, and those are slightly different topics from having a transmission format. So I'm wondering, Patrick, like, what's your take on this? Especially keeping in mind that the more complex the format gets, the higher the danger also that adoption is being like blocked, right? And we have ways to handle that, but what's your overall take? Is it still a transmission format? Do we want to keep it a transmission format?
So I think this is like the most important question at SIGGRAPH. And I think that SIGGRAPH is also the most influential time of the year for glTF each year, and that everyone's voice here should help determine the direction, especially that glTF ecosystem forum that Neil flashed up this Thursday. I flashed up again to his talk. I want to draw a couple parallels before I try to answer or somewhat dodge the question. So one is, in business, they say, you're not in the market you say you're in the market your customers tell you you're in. So I would say there's glTF as we say it is, and there's glTF as the community is using it. We should pay attention to how they're using it. And then just looking at Cesium for a moment, where we do 3D geospatial, we've been reasonably successful. We've grown to about 60 people now, and people will come and they're like, Patrick, you're such a visionary. And I look back and I'm like, well, we made it open source. We spent a lot of time with the community. We listened to the community and we did what the community told us to do. I'm like, I had absolutely no idea where we were going to go. We just made it open when we listened, right? So I think with glTF, we should be seeing. And when you look at glTF with the extensions framework, we do see folks that are doing interactivity, folks that are doing node-based procedural textures. And then I just heard that the audio effort is also like a node-based system. So there are some pretty sophisticated features that are being added. And I think we should embrace that. We should be interested in that. But we do have to stay true to our roots, and that the format is so robustly interoperable, and it's made that so successful. Like if I have a GLB file, and I go to drag and drop it or put it into a runtime engine, like I know it's going to work. Okay, that's a huge feature. So I think we need to figure out, how do we embrace glTF as a platform to support many different things, and maybe even if you look at VRM, right, that does animation, very widely used in Japan. That's glTF plus a bunch of extensions. Great. The work we did with 3D tiles is glTF, extensions, and spatial data structure. It really could all just be glTF plus extensions. Great. I mean, there may be other things if you look at like architecture, engineering, and construction, right? We want them, instead of just doing something completely different, we'd love for them to build on glTF plus extensions. At the same time, we don't want every extension in the universe to be required for everything. So I think this is the conversation we need to have, today and this week. There's talk of profiles, there's talk of different file extensions, but I think we should encourage, as Neil called it, the Darwinism of people making extensions.
Well, thank you so much. A lot of good stuff there. I want to add a couple of points. So I think 3D tiles is really a perfect example, because like when we started with glTF, we were at the front of rendering large power plants and large cars, like CAD models of cars. They shouldn't look realistic. They should look like what the engineer made them, like with false colors, right? Like pink, yellow, whatever. But like you have 17 million triangles in your browser. And then we noticed, okay, we need some hierarchical LOD. We need some data structures that can handle this, where we have like a tree that stores the bounding boxes, and then we can zoom in and load adaptively the leaves. And then we noticed, like these guys over there in Philadelphia, they're doing something pretty similar. It's like a Google Maps for 3D, and it's called 3D tiles, and it's all using glTF for the geometry payload, right? And like the the asset payload basically, and organizing a structure around it without saying that structure needs to be part of the standard, but it's a different standard that uses glTF. And I think that's super beautiful. And like in 2015, we had this get together at Web 3D conference that was at Khronos, that was honestly always our way of publishing something. It's good if you're doing a PhD on the side, and then you need to have some papers, and SIGGRAPH paper is really hard and takes a lot of time, but Web 3D paper was, let's say, more easy to do in hindsight. And then there was a great platform to actually get something out and say, here's a proposal. We'll see what people do with it. And then we got this tutorial track, and we're really happy to see 3D tiles and how we can actually possibly reuse the same kind of idea for like rendering large cars, right? And they would all use the same like atomic bits, namely glTF files, for the geometry payload. And I think that's a very nice example of how like just like a JPEG, right? Something that does a certain job very well can be reused in so many ways without actually needing to change a single line in the spec or adding anything. And on the other hand, we see like what I mentioned before, right? Like some possibly additional complexity being like proposed, and like people basically calling from different directions, which is very natural, right? And we want broad adoption. So I think that's maybe the tricky bit. So on the one hand, allow this Darwinism, as it was called earlier, of like the market picking what they need, but at the same time making sure that you don't build a Swiss Army knife, right? Because complexity could be a problem. And right now, the beauty of glTF is that it's still reasonable to handle and implementation. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And you also dodged your question. What's important is we should be talking about it all week, and how do we preserve and celebrate the robust interoperability we have through the simplicity, and then how do we let these new use cases be served? And I think this concept of glTF as a platform that other things can be built on, and you saw that core glTF, I think it's really, really valuable. While you were speaking, I was just trying to formulate that, like, okay, well, I know XML is dated, but there's XML and a bunch of things built on XML. And, are there some parallels we can draw that are well established and proven?
Well, yeah, totally. And maybe trying to answer the question a bit better, and at the same time talk about XML. Like we worked a lot at sort of like with X3D, which many people might not know anymore. It's like the success of VRML. It was like the only ISO standard before glTF, and it's all XML based. And there were efforts to, again, use glTF as like a leaf node element in X3D files. And X3D files allow you to do a lot of things, like including interactivity with like routes and so on. If you want to see something fine, there's this series called Khronos, which is a VRML animated cartoon, and each episode, like short episode of Loops, is like a 3D cartoon basically that's defined in a single VRML file with animations, interactivity, sounds, and everything. So it can literally do everything, but it's quite complex. And then the idea of, again, having glTF as a container that just does a certain thing, namely like defining the mesh of like the animated Cesium lamp, right? For example, or the milk truck, or whatever you have in your scene. I think that's a very intriguing way to position the format. So that's my answer to the question, basically saying like, it's the right tool for a certain job. Let's make it the best tool in the world for this job. And if we need something around it, I mean, just like the VRM example that you mentioned, right? We can build very robust other formats around it that are using it for domain-specific use cases. Yeah. And I think that's also maybe something that we observe in the Metaverse standards forum, right? Like looking, what is the strength of a glTF versus the strength of a USD, for example? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think this week we should go to the whiteboard and draw out what are some of these ideas. There's VRM, there's 3D tiles. What does what could the future hold? As for USD and glTF, so We started the Metaverse Standards Forum probably 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, and Neil drove that. And within the Metaverse Standards Forum, we started a group called 3D Asset Interoperability using USD and glTF. I co-chair it along with Mark Petit, formerly from Epic Games, and Khronie from Adobe. And what we're doing there is simply providing literally a forum or a place that we can all come and talk about glTF and USD and where is there common ground that can help facilitate interoperability and smooth workflows, not make glTF do what USD does. It should not do that. And likewise, not make USD, optimized for all of glTF is. So far, I think we probably had 30 meetings or something over the last 2 years, and we bring in a lot of folks to talk. Hey, what are you doing with physics? What are you doing with interactivity? What are you doing for implicit services? And I think one is it's created a very nice kind of vibe and positivity and culture among like glTF and USD are kind of, two flavors that can go well together, not two things that are opposed. And then two, I don't think we've proven success yet, but I do think we're going to see smoother workflows over time when it comes to things like materials, from how our materials represent and USD, and how it can get a reasonable workflow to the glTF. But I do feel when you just look at the formats, USB for large production offering where you have 30 different artists and one specializes in fur, and another one does hair, and another one does skin. If you need the composition, then glTF where you need efficient dissemination. So it's tried and true.
Well, that sounds great. And that also sets the agenda, I think, for the next couple of days. So that's amazing. Thank you so much, Patrick.